Honeybees, these magical ambassadors of sweetness and light, have been around longer than the Himalayas, from the time of dinosaurs. How could one not be fascinated by the ingenuity, the longevity, the splendor of these magical creatures? Commander Jacques Cousteau said that the happiness of the bee and the dolphin is to exist, but for man, it is to know that and to wonder at it. These hardworking creatures labor their entire lives for the benefit of others. They provide pollination services that contribute largely to 1/3 of the food that all of us eat and need to survive. Though he never actually said it, Albert Einstein is credited often with saying that if not for the honeybee, or if the honeybee were to cease to exist, that the human race would be wiped out within 4 years. That's not true, but our diet would be significantly less interesting because from almonds all the way to zucchini, the honeybee plays a role in bringing that food to us. Some people point out correctly that we do not need honeybees in the city, and we don't, but we don't need museums. We don't need a lot of the things that we have, but they make our lives better, more interesting, and they allow us in the city to connect to nature in a way that otherwise would be difficult. So in our case, in New York City, they pollinate the Big Apple and they make life a little bit sweeter. There are 258 types of bees in New York City, and until recently, it was unlawful to harbor honeybees. Some of us thought that legalization could have been some kind of an amnesty program for those outcast bees. We didn't think that 257 or 258 should make a very big difference. And the bees were already there. They've been there for 400 years in New York. Beekeeping had not always been unlawful in Gotham City. It's only recently that happened, and luckily it's been overturned now. And some of us thought that it just didn't make any sense, and we were doing it anyway. The remains of urban apiaries have been found in Israel from 3,000 years ago, and not in the middle of nowhere, but in the middle of a thriving city area. So urban beekeeping is nothing new at all. And if you fast forward all the way to New Amsterdam in the 1600s, the Dutch kept beehives down on what is now the area around Battery Park City. That's before they traded Manhattan for a bunch of rubber trees in Suriname in the worst real estate deal ever. 2 centuries later, still in Manhattan, the area around Orchard Street on the Lower East Side, a lot of farmland, a lot of trees, they were pollinated by bees. Go forward another 100 years to the turn of the 19th century, you've got hospitals, orphanages with beehives on top to provide sweeteners for the kitchens of those institutions. And now we've got a bakery in Bushwick that does the same. We have hotels, we have restaurants that do just that. So urban beekeeping is nothing new, though in the last several years it's had something of a renaissance. If you'll forgive me here in Italy to use the word renaissance, I know you had one too. But really they have their place. And not to compare your renaissance to our urban beekeeping renaissance, but it's no Sistine Chapel, it's no Mona Lisa, but we have, in our own way, contributed to the beautification of New York City with our beehives. For example, we've placed some beehives on top of the Museum of Modern Art and made them into works of art. Here, Rudolf Steiner high school student Sasha Pinto shows off a beehive that she made to look like a tenement, the same sort of tenement that when 2 million Italians came around 1900 to New York City, they would have lived in that type of tenement. And here it is, well occupied on top of the museum. But MoMA went even further than this. So here is their sculpture garden, a beautiful sculpture garden. And you'll see that it's replete with trees and sculptures. And here are people enjoying a summer concert. And you'll see to the right, there are some trees there. Well, besides the Matisse, Picasso, and more sculptures that are there, there's a wonderful active beehive right beyond those trees. And if you'll imagine that, right behind the leaves, there she is. Last year, MoMA had its first ever living art installation. And by cajoling and bribing the honeybees in a manner that in no way damaged or offended or compromised them, I affixed them to Huyg's cast of a Max Weber statue and encouraged them to build there, and they did. And we created a living work of art in this way, and a robust colony of bees were living on top of that woman's head, or as her head, as she just reclined there for a few months. And that's my job. I absorb stings, and I steal honey from bees, and then I put it in bottles and sell it. And that's it. And that's what it means to be a beekeeper. And I have little worker bees of my own who stand there at our farmers market and help me provide this product to others who are interested in it. So, back to the ban on urban beekeeping. From 1999 until 2010, thanks to a Giuliani-headed administration which also banned creatures such as emu, elephants, ferrets, and kangaroos, we beekeepers had to do our work in secret, and we call that 11-year period the bitter years. We went underground, not literally underground because you can't keep bees underground. We secreted our beehives. We put them on top of buildings. We disguised them to look like air conditioners, like chimneys, as you can see here. That's a beehive. In some way, we tried to keep them from prying eyes. It was a little bit humiliating to find out that there were some cities like Boise, Idaho, that had legalized beekeeping ahead of us. New York City doesn't like to consider itself behind Idaho in more than potato production. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, just think of somebody from the South getting ahead of you in some way. So in 2007, we formed New York City Beekeepers Association, and we believe in promoting safe, responsible beekeeping. We care about the bees, we care about the neighbors, the whole ball of wax, so to speak, we care about. Working together was better than working as individuals, rogue, outlaw beekeepers, working clandestine hives and harvesting contraband honey. It wasn't really for us, so we pulled together and we began a legalization effort, and it worked, and it was time-consuming. But from 2010, beekeeping became legal in New York City once again. And like a hive in the spring, like a beehive in the spring with a strong queen, our numbers have grown exponentially. Here, people are lined up at, I promise I didn't plan this, Columbus Circle. Cristoforo Colombo, I'm sure you would know him as. And they are lined up to pick up packages of bees to begin the year anew. Here are packages of bees. Bees come in packages of about 12,000 if you want to start a hive. That's roughly 1.5 kilos of bees. Bees are sold by the pound. If you don't trust the beekeeper, you can count the legs and divide by 6, and you can figure out how many you have there. So, and here's one of our members, Ray. He's taking his bees back home to the Lower East Side on his bicycle. Others take them in the subways. They take them on buses. And this is how we move around and we pollinate the city. But we weren't alone. Hong Kong, Kyoto, Reykjavik, Berlin, Rome, Paris, London, many others were also enjoying an uptick in urban beekeeping that continues to this day. And there is great interconnectivity betwixt many of us in the urban beekeeping world. Throughout the world, it reminds me of the collaboration within the hive. And I think it's a very nice thing indeed. And thanks to these lovely ladies, well, let's take a brief look into their world, their amazing and sometimes cruel society. And when I say bee during this talk, I'm referring to Apis mellifera, and in my 30-plus years of working with bees, I've almost exclusively worked with Apis mellifera linguistica, which is commonly called the Italian honeybee. It was brought from this part of Italy in the 1800s to other parts of Europe, and then over to the US in the 1890s, so thank you. And there are three types of honeybees in that colony. The queen, her majesty, the so-called ruler of the colony, though she's a little more than an indentured servant whose role is to make babies, 2,000 a day, or be the victim of regicide. The workers, they comprise the majority of the population. They're all females, and the drone, who's the male of the colony. The queen, she's made more than she's born. With a special diet, any fertilized egg can become a queen. She lives for years, not weeks, 35 times longer than the average worker. Heavy layeth her crown, though, because if she doesn't perform well, meaning she's not an efficient layer of eggs, she'll be murdered by her own children. And should two queens end up in the same hive, usually they'll fight to the death. So for the sake of the colony, it's better if the superior layer triumphs. But this is not always the case. Sometimes a lousy lay is an excellent fighter, and like my first wife. And so, oh, thank you. That was unexpected. Are you telling me I'm finished? Then there's the poor malign drone. You thought that was a joke, but it wasn't. Then there's the poor malign drone, the male, the misunderstood character. The word in English, drone, has a pejorative connotation. It's negative. He cannot sting. He cannot gather pollen. He cannot gather nectar. He spreads disease. He only wants one thing, the same thing most men want. He only gets it once, and if he gets it, he dies from it. And that's him. That's what he does. And because it's come up, and we're in Italy, it's a romantic place, what is lovemaking like for the honeybee? I know that you're curious about it. Well, it's passionate. It's uninhibited. It's public. It's unconventional, and it is brief. Sun Tzu told us that the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. So the fastest and the strongest in a group of drones pursue the queen, catch her, and love her, and then a dozen others do the same thing. Basically, she has sex with her brothers and his friends. And this once-in-a-lifetime feat of athleticism occurs sky high in the drone congregating area. At the same time, the drone reaches his figurative manhood. His literal manhood is torn from his body, and he dies presumably with mixed emotions. L'amore è doloroso. But the Italian honeybee has been bred, just like the cow didn't wander out of the woods one day and offer up her teat for a glass of milk. The honeybees have been bred for specific purposes. She's got both a gentleness to her and an excitability, an aggression. Let's call it a passion. I don't want to call her aggressive here. The Italian honeybee is very passionate. She has the gentleness of a mozzarella di bufala and the explosive temperament of an Alphonse de Borgia, something like that. And around 1900 and the following decade, which is just after the Italian honeybee made it to the U.S., about 2 million Italians migrated there too. Many took up residence in Little Italy, Lower Manhattan. Now today, very few Italians live in that neighborhood until recently, when we moved 350,000 new little Italian immigrants there, took up residence in St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, the only remaining Catholic cemetery in Manhattan. And I found out before I left that brick wall that's 10 feet high that surrounds it was built by Italian immigrants. I thought you might want to know that. Monsignor Sicano had 7 beehives installed, one for each of the 7 cities of the apocalypse. Each is populated with Italian honeybees, which pollinate the surrounding neighborhoods and keep the sheep company. The bees make amazing honey, and the sheep are expert grass trimmers and purveyors of fine fertilizer. It's written that the person who has a way with bees gets special attention from God. Definitely there is something divine about bees and honey. The Egyptian god Ra cried tears that turned into bees when they hit the ground. That was way before the Egyptians let Moses and his people go. The Hindu god of desire, Kamadeva, she carries a bow with a string of honeybees. Cupid would dip his arrow into honey before he would let it fly. The Quran has an entire chapter on honeybees. I'm not proselytizing anything here, but because all these deities and religions see bees as so important, perhaps we can make sure that we appreciate and remember the value that they have and that they are worthy perhaps of more respect than they get. Back in New York, on occasion, the New York City honeybee wears her yarmulke to avoid being mistaken for a wasp. I'm not sure if the interpreters can work with that. But a well-known and respected Italian family, the Vecchios, and their clothing store, Brooks Brothers, they were at the forefront of supporting urban beekeeping in New York City. Claudio Del Vecchio and his fantastic wife, Deborah, they had beehives installed on top of their flagship Brooks Brothers store as part of a greening initiative and also to make the most fashionable bees in town. And then there are other places, New York buildings like the Waldorf Astoria, the Residence Inn Marriott Courtyard. That's the view from their apiary looking over Central Park. There are bees on the Durst family's One Bryant Park and at their Helena building on the Upper West Side. Landmark cemeteries like Greenwood in Brooklyn. We'll be putting some in Woodlawn in the Bronx soon. At a small startup in Chelsea. At a bakery in Bushwick, Brooklyn, if you like alliteration. Across from Prospect Park, Ballet Tech, an elite ballet school near Union Square, tenements in Harlem, Corona, Queens, Rockaway Beach, Hell's Kitchen. There are far too many to tell you about. And those that you saw are just some of the ones that I take care of. And then there are others, of course, hundreds of others who take care of bees. So let me tell you a little bit about where I come from in all of this. From left to right, you see my father, Norm, myself, and then my nephew, Patrick. Patrick is part of the 5th generation of beekeepers in our family. Norm's mother was a beekeeper, and so was her father. Beyond that, we assume they were, but we don't really know. My brother, Mike, he's a police officer, and he is also a beekeeper. My mother is more of a bookkeeper than she's the one in pink. She's more of a bookkeeper than a beekeeper. She also likes the farmer's market so she can make sure that all the honey money goes in the right place. I later married up, and we have Juliana, my queen bee, and though she cannot give me 2,000 babies per day like my mistress queen bees can, we do have 2 wonderful boys, Max getting his fingers sticky at around age 7, and then we have a recent pollination project. So, oh, thanks. Here he is probably gathering information to complain to his therapist about me later. So the bees bind our family together, and whatever their motivation or indifference regarding our presence in their lives, they are wonderful teachers and companions for us. And I enjoy passing that knowledge on to others who are interested. So the beekeepers of New York City, of the New York City Beekeepers Association, have been very active in the slow food movement. We've been to Terra Madre in Torino a few years ago. It continues to bring communities together in a way that I never could have imagined unless I had experienced it for myself. We've helped educate nearly 1,000 beekeepers over the last decade. We brought also bees to underserved areas of New York City, Brownsville, East New York, Brooklyn, the South Bronx, places that desperately need help to combat the food deserts and the inequality that is inherent in our system. As a beekeeper, I work with many agencies, including NYPD. This is Officer Mays. He's a beekeeper. He's based in Queens. And we have Detective Dan Higgins. They're both sworn police officers, and they're both swarm police officers because if there's a bee emergency or a perception of an emergency, NYPD comes and assists with bee-related calls. This is what a swarm looks like. It's a whole bunch of bees who decided to go somewhere else, and they make John Q. Public nervous. But they land all over the place in New York City. When they swarm, when Lucifer, the most beautiful angel, left heaven, he took a third of the angels with him. That's kind of what a swarm is like. One queen leaves, she takes about a third of the population with her, and they start their own kingdom. Hopefully not an underworld, but they'll land wherever they can. This cyclist was surprised. And they're looking to establish a new home. That's how honeybees propagate their species. That's how 1 becomes 2 and 2 becomes 4 and so on and so forth. Sometimes we have to talk them off the ledge. That's looking down. And sometimes it's tricky. It's not as high as it looks. It's only about 18 stories. It's not 20. And it's really from 20 that you have to worry. NYCBA is actually under the umbrella of a 501c3 charity. That means it's a federal charity, and that's called Bees Without Borders. Bees Without Borders has a mission to help alleviate poverty through beekeeping work. Basically, we're trying to help people who have very little money make a little more money through beekeeping, because that's really all we know. And it also combines the things that are the things that are important to me: travel, education, philanthropy, and honeybees, with a nice mix of family in there. So we travel the globe. We try to help people pollinate their gardens or farms through the labor of the honeybee. We help beekeepers become better beekeepers. We help non-beekeepers become beekeepers. We've made multiple trips here to the Samburu in Kenya. We've worked in Fiji. We've worked in Iraq. The Iraqi beekeepers will place their soiled undergarments in the beehives because they believe that in doing so, the bees will recognize their scent and not sting them. And there's no need for you to laugh, because I know what you do on New Year's regarding your own underwear. Somebody just told me. Ecuador, Moldova, Haiti, Uganda, Nigeria, Guatemala, and of course, in New York City, where a sizable population of each of the aforementioned communities is represented. And we're able to work with all types of people, form bonds, educate them, better educate ourselves, and through these tiny winged creatures, have a greater understanding of their community, of our own community, of ourselves. For the sake of my children, my neighbors' children, the children in Samburu land and elsewhere where we've worked, It is a very rewarding experience. Honeybees are the canary in the coal mine for the food supply and the environment. That in itself is another talk, but with the help of these little 4-winged angels on our shoulders, if we take care of them as they have taken care of us, we will be able to make this desire to better feed the planet come to fruition, 1 blossom and 1 teaspoon of honey at a time. Thank you.